when you vote by mail and you submit it to the county or you submit your ballot, the ballot should be automatically randomized, like a deck of cards. You don't know what's going to come out, especially when you have millions and millions of them. So do we have these charts available to put up on screen really quick? So because of the mail-in balloting, it was more likely that fraud was committed. But it's also more likely that we can discover that fraud. It is more likely that we are able to actually be able to find out the fraud that they may or may not have been engaged in. So if you look at Florida, we'll have these charts up on screen in a second. Florida followed about a 50-50 skew of the vote ratio batch. But in the other states, there wasn't enough randomness. There was almost a very predictable flow to how these ballots were actually being opened and reported. So what does that mean? If Florida, you win by 3%, then you could assume mail-ins would maybe skew 50-50 or slightly for Biden, which they do. And that ratio held throughout the election day counting. But in the key states, they don't. Mail-in voting makes it easier to be able to detect fraud because it automatically randomizes the ballots. And so we're going to get some of these on screen, and we're going to do a deeper statistical analysis. But is this, what state is this? This is Florida. So this is the way it should look. And what you have on the x-axis is the batch reporting time. So that's basically the time and the dates of when this stuff comes in. And then on the y-axis, you have the vote ratio of batch. So this is Florida, and let's go to the next one. And now we have Wisconsin. Do you see the difference? Especially when it comes to the randomization side of it. We'll go to the next one. Is that Pennsylvania? That's Minnesota. Very, very suspicious. Not an equal distribution of 50-50. Next one. Pennsylvania. Even more suspicious. And so you can take that off screen. We're going to have a couple mathematicians on the program to help explain all of this in further detail. And what I find to be most interesting is how the activist media has decided to ask none of these questions. Remember when they were into Russian collusion and foreign interference in our elections, and they controlled all the institutions. They control the governmental institutions. They control the media institutions. They control all the major institutions in our country to be able to push an outright and complete fabricated lie against the president. And so what's incredible is how the activist media, the minute that Joe Biden gets coronated as president, they just stop caring about things that they used to actually care about. For example, the New York Times wrote, as more vote by mail, faulty ballots could impact elections. It goes through here and actually goes to show that potentially Republicans could benefit from absentee ballots. This is the reason they wrote this in 2012. But then there was a methodology that was developed, kind of a machinery in California of ballot laundering. And this is called granny farming. We talked about this earlier with the 1,776% increase in voter registration for 90-plus-year-olds in Pennsylvania. Voting, and this is very interesting, voting by mail also played a crucial role in the 2000 presidential election in Florida, when the margin between George W. Bush and Al Gore was razor thin and hundreds of absentee ballots were counted in apparent violation of state law. The flawed ballots from Americans living abroad, including some without postmarks and some postmarked after the election, some without witness signatures, some mailed from within the United States, and some sent by people who voted twice, all would have been disqualified had the state's election law been strictly enforced. You know what this is? This is the New York Times in 2012 making an argument that absentee ballots and strict election laws would have helped Democrat Al Gore. Oh, how times have changed. Now you're not even allowed to talk about this. This is written in 2012. In a recent primary here, almost 40% of ballots were not cast in a voting booth on the day of the election. They were split between early votes cast at polling places and absentee votes, which makes him nervous. Mr. Sancho, the Leon County election supervisor. Efforts to prevent fraud at polling places have ironic consequences, a professor at Loyola Law School told the Senate Judiciary Committee last September. He said they will, quote, drive more voters into the absentee system, where fraud and coercion have been documented to be real and legitimate concerns.